about some nuggets shared by all my guests in this third series, which answer the question, what are the things people need in order to stay in their organisation? Here are 8 critical factors to reflect on either for your own career or if you're leading a business that could make a difference between having a retention strategy that works and one that doesn't. First up, there's always a deal to be negotiated between employer and employee, and it needs to work for both parties. When I spoke with Jane Van Zale, CEO of the national charity Working Families, she explained how this deal has shifted since the pandemic and has become more individualised, less one size fits all. Here's Jane.
We've known for some time, because we saw this during the pandemic, that our employer members innovate to change ways of working to support their people. It was really very interesting the first lockdown in the summer of 2020. We asked employers what they were concerned about. And what we found fascinating, and I suppose unsurprising, because the employers that we work with really are interested in ensuring that their employees are happy in their work, was a real focus on well-being. And during the pandemic, we saw our employer members innovate to support their people. And those employers have now embedded those new ways of working and reap the benefits. A reduction in real estate and travel costs and increases in productivity. Um, we're also interested to see that forward-thinking employers are building flexible working into their recruitment processes. And because our research shows that 70% of UK parents wouldn't even apply for a job that didn't have flexible options listed up front.
Okay.
And anecdotally, we know that the pandemic allowed employers to have insight into the lives of their people. All of those Zoom and Teams calls where, somebody appeared in the background, a baby wanting something, a child demanding a second biscuit, somebody's cat or dog or partner or the postman. All of those things just made our lives, all of the things that we know happen in our own lives, we suddenly saw in everybody else's lives too. Um, and we we know particularly that during the pandemic, those with caring responsibilities were forced to juggle homeschooling and a job. And there was lots of talk about during the pandemic that we were all in the same storm. And that, of course, was true to an extent. But what we felt very strongly was that we were not all in the same boat. And the experience of people living in either shared accommodation or in really small flats in the centre of towns with no access to green spaces, it was much, much more difficult. And anybody with small children who were trying to work at the same time was very difficult. And so we think many employers and line managers, that new perspective into what balancing work and caring actually looked like. And although we are the charity for working families, everybody has a family, whether it's you and your goldfish, or whether you or not you have self-care responsibilities. There is always needs to be that acknowledgement that we're human and that we have lives and needs outside of our roles.
Yes, absolutely. And it's great to see or to hear that your research is confirming that employers haven't just dropped all that acknowledgement and well-being support that they put in place during the pandemic, but have actually embedded it and are taking it further. And it sounds like, a big thing that's changed is this recognition of the need of individual needs. You can't treat
Mm.
everybody in the workplace the same and assume that the same model of work is going to fit and help everyone perform at their best. It sounds like that's been a big shift in employers' awareness and approach to managing employees.
I think the other thing, for me, the thing that's kind of tied to that is we as a society talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion, particularly within the workplace. But what I've noticed is that the language is now changing to say that we want equity,
Mm.
because giving everybody exactly the same thing is not necessarily fair. It's very much more around what is it that you as an individual need. And working families would always say that, as a charity would say that, there needs to be a negotiation between the employer and the employee, in the sense that there is a job of work to do. And that's something that we sign up to do when we go to work for an organization. And a really good quality organization will treat us as a human being and will have conversations with us about what's working and what's not working.
My first guest on this series, Randall Peterson, also commented on the importance of negotiation. Randall is Professor of Organisational Behaviour and the founding director of London Business School's Leadership Institute. And in this second piece of advice on how to make people want to stay, he describes how employers need to help people negotiate their identity in the organisation and how to draw on key moments in the employer employee relationship to help people find their fit. What are the most effective things that leaders, including boards, but also executive teams, can do to make employees want to stay? Is there things that they can do that have a real impact?
Well, of course, there are some things, and research is very clear that um, that different organizations have better and worse, more effective, more engaging, less engaging cultures. And the cultures that are most successful, right, generally, right, are the ones that allow people the kind of space that we're talking about here, because it's always a kind of negotiation between the individuals who have interests and a way of being, etc., and the needs of the organization, and how do we bring them together. And if we can, you know so for example, one of my colleagues here has been doing work looking at just simple things like how we do employee inductions. Our traditional view of this is very kind of, here are the 5,000 things you need to know. 4,900 of them you will forget by the end of the day because everything is new. So why do we do that? Well, that's the way it's always been done. Rather, um, why don't we say to people, here are the 10 things you really, really need to know, and let's talk about how you're going to negotiate who you are with the organization. What do you think you bring? And here's kind of what the needs are. How are we going to make this come together?
Yeah,
And it turns out it reduces turnover, it improves performance, it kind of ticks most every box. And it's not about just making people feel good. It is about helping people negotiate their identity in an organization. Because if people feel like they fit, that's the sense of belonging and fit is the thing that keeps people there.
yeah,
I belong in this organization. I fit in this organization, right? As opposed to, I'm not sure I fit, but I know exactly what I need to do to get a pay rise or to get, that kind of stuff is okay. Fit, belonging. That's where the magic happens.
yeah. That's fascinating to hear, and I think I've read um, around that topic as well, and often companies are beginning to look at it or realizing that it's about those key moments they have to create a
Mm.
really rewarding experience. And obviously induction day is a really key moment, and it sounds from what you described that instead of kind of reading out the here's the handbook and here's the policies you need to be aware of and leave people feeling a bit stupefied and less than enthused, it's actually about helping them have a really meaningful experience on that first day that leaves them feeling actually really enthused about, as you say, being part of this community and feeling like you fit in.
Yeah, because the other problem with the 5,000 rules is here's your straitjacket, is what you're really saying.
Yeah,
And people don't want a straitjacket. Nobody has ever wanted one. You tolerate it if you don't have many great options. But these days, there are a lot more options than there used to be for our parents and our grandparents in terms of employment. People will walk to some place where they don't have to wear the straitjacket.
isn't that a great reminder from Randall to focus on the 10 things an employee needs to know? I think organizations get lazy in that they send so many communications across so many channels without really distilling down the few critical things that they want people to know. No wonder people often feel pulled in too many different directions and across competing priorities. My guest, Susan Room, former business leader and now a voice and executive coach, talked about how if we actually mapped the amount of time required to really deliver on these various commitments, let alone take on new ones, against how much time is realistically available once we've taken out time for eating and sleeping and looking after ourselves, let alone going on holiday, there's usually a huge deficit. Time is not elastic, it's finite. And as Susan said, there's only so far you can pull a rubber band before it snaps. So here's the third thing that people need, and it's help to manage their boundaries and to say no. Here's Susan. So, how do you help people to say no, particularly if they're in an organizational culture which is very full on, very expecting of people to be available, at short notice outside of normal working hours?
Mm.
Could you share a tip or two that listeners might be able to put into practice?
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to mention here the work of William Ury, that's Ury, and I draw on his work quite a lot, and particularly what he calls his positive no. And it's a three-part process which involves a yes, a no, and then a yes with a question mark. And the way Yuri explains it is the first yes that you say is not to others all the time. I mean, clearly, if your boss or, if there's something mission critical and you deem you have to say yes or you want to say yes, then you're going to say yes to the person who's asking you to do something. However, Yuri encourages us to get far clearer on what are our red lines, what are our boundaries, what matters to us. And the clearer we can get on those things, the more inclined we are, the more we galvanize our resolve to say yes to those things. And that then implies saying no to other people. And obviously, that's not no in a way that damages the relationship. And it might not even be an explicit no, I can't do that, but it's perhaps I'm not able to do this for you within that time frame. So you're implicitly saying no. And that leads on to the third part, which is the yes question mark, which is you offer something in return. So you might not be able to do this, but how about you do that? Or has the person who's asking you to do something thought about some other people who might be able to help? Or so you're collaborating, but within boundaries that also work for you,
Mm.
rather than becoming known as the person who always says yes. And we know how they tend to attract more and more work because they always say yes. And that little phrase, we teach people how to treat us, I think is worth remembering here. The more we say yes and we're seen to be the person who always does that, the more we are telling people effectively it's okay to keep asking me.
Mm.
It's not. So I think this little model is one useful way of reminding ourselves that we too have boundaries and values, and it's okay to say no. Again, Yuri's work suggests that people are fearful about saying no because they fear it's going to damage a relationship, but actually we're more likely to damage the relationship if we take on too much and then we burn out or we can't deliver to the expectations, our own and others. So this is, I think, I like frameworks, I like models. They make sense of things that can otherwise feel messy, and Yuri's model is one that I particularly like.
Yes, it's a great one. I've not come across it before, but I really like it because it's it sends that message that even if you can't say yes then and there to the request that somebody is making of you, you are getting across that you want to help them, but you're also being respectful of your own and their needs as well around time or availability or whatever.
So I think when we push back and we say no to others and we perhaps ask them questions that help them to get clearer on what is driving their request and particularly what is driving their deadlines, it can be incredibly helpful because we know how busyness sometimes sort of eh, overflows and people come to us with multiple requests that aren't particularly well thought through. And by pausing and asking questions to get clarity on what it is we're being asked. Are we the right person to do it? Have we got the capacity? If we haven't, what needs to fall away in order for us to do this if this is the new priority? We're actually helping ourselves and others working with us, often our manager, to get clearer on what it is they're asking and what the consequences and implications are of their requests. So I think it takes courage, but it's ultimately really powerful for individuals, teams, and organizations.
As well as knowing that they're focused on the priorities, the fourth thing people need is to know that their efforts are making a positive difference and to see evidence of that. My guest, Ariel White Simikalis, talked very passionately about how important it is to help people feel connected to their sense of purpose, to know that their work matters, and it's contributing to a better world in some way. Ariel is a corporate finance lawyer, a partner at the global law firm Goodwin, and a specialist in ESG, environmental, social, and governance matters. And here she explains how she helps her team to see the bigger picture and to manage their lives outside of work too. And from what you see here, what do people also struggle with in their working lives or work environments today? What do you notice about that?
I think there's probably two key things. I think certainly what we're seeing now, sort of younger generations, they really they want to find more purpose in what they do. I think they want to feel like they're having a bit more impact. And I guess what I would challenge people to think, because I confess it was slightly of my mindset too before, but you think you write off the profession, a legal profession, for example, because you don't think you can, or being the corporate aspect of it, maybe, because you don't think you can have impact in the way that you might if you went and worked at an NGO or something like that. And I think that's where I would challenge people to sort of say, okay, and the way I feel I've been able to do it is I feel I can have a lot of impact and still be a corporate finance lawyer. And actually, through being a corporate finance lawyer, I can actually have quite a bit of impact for the people I advise and the teams I run and the community I operate in. And so I think it's looking for being creative about and less dismissive. I think about having that sort of how things aren't always as you expect, and actually you can create your own reality a little bit more than people kind of recognize. And so I think people are struggling with that. And I think COVID, obviously, people had a lot more time to themselves at home and thinking about things, and which is good, actually. I think that those are all really good conversations to be having with yourself. But I think one of the people, certainly in our industry, people feel disconnected to what they're doing. And in fact, it's something that I very much think about as I'm sort of building a practice and building a team, how much time I try to spend with my members of my team. Do they understand the strategy? They understand the bigger picture and they feel bought into what we're all trying to build. And I think that gives them a sense of purpose and impact and connecting with why we're up at 11 o'clock at night looking at a term sheet. It's because it's part of this bigger thing that we're building, which is going to be pretty exciting. So I think finding that connection, and I think those of us who run teams and those of us who are in leadership positions need to be really mindful of that need of people to feel connected to what they're doing and that they're having impact through what they're doing. So I think it's we need to think about how we empower them, how we have those conversations, and make sure that we are answering a little bit of that why, or helping people discover that why and find it within our teams and within our professions. I think that's the challenge for those of us in sort of leadership positions within financial services. sectors. And then secondly, I think people, and I may be speaking a bit more to the female here, is recognizing that it's hard. And it's really hard to be a working mom. It's really hard to have, I have a 5-year-old, it's really hard to have young children when you're in a senior role. And, then the intersectionality of being, having, different other characteristics of being a diverse individual in the field compounds all of that. Let's be honest. But recognizing that is the challenge, and I think again, those of us in leadership positions need to look out for those situations and help people. And I do try to do that as much as I can. I think that's one of the things that gives me so much fulfillment.
One of the defining characteristics of today's world of work, in knowledge-based organisations at least, is the fragmentation of our time and attention as we zip between calls and meetings, apps and tasks, and all the while we're receiving incoming notifications and messages from all the different channels. It's brain-frying stuff that can lead to cognitive overload, anxiety, and unproductively long working hours. This is a problem that my guest Rob Hatch knows only too well. He's the author of the business book Attention, The Power of Simple Decisions in a Distracted World. And he's a coach for business owners and executives. And in this 5th piece of advice on how to help people want to stay in your organisation, he explains how organisations can help people to focus on the priorities and reduce those distractions. As you make the point in the book, if we give into that temptation as that thought pops into our mind, oh, I mustn't forget to do X. And a lot of people would argue if it only takes a couple of minutes, that's a more efficient way of doing it. But then you make the point that, but then you're more likely to be distracted while you're just doing that one thing and then end up doing another 2 or 3 things and then forget actually what it was you were trying to do in the first place. And you've just discovered half an hour has just been lost from your precious time in the day.
Half an hour's been lost, and the focus that you had. So there's this sort of idea of residual attention. Just even that task of switching to the one thing, even if you did come back, finding your place again, carrying over whatever it was that you just did, even if it was something simple, there's sort of still some thought energy that's spilling over from what you just did. So first and foremost, it's about the individual, but the communication part, I think this is where it gets, in your book, you talk about having a healthy time culture. And I don't know always where that comes from, but I think it starts with individuals starting to slowly, subtly make those declarations of boundaries and communicate things like, I want to, meet the expectations of this work for you. However, when this happens, it's pulling me off. And maybe even working with your supervisor, if you're not in a position where you've got control over the culture, shaping the culture. Again, looking at and maybe not accepting and opening up conversations about the way information flows on email. If your organization is treating email as though it's a chat feature, that's probably not a good, healthy way to use email. And even in Slack, are there, do we need to have every notification for every Slack message that comes inside of a group? Because every little ding and buzz, sort of, whether you think you can ignore it or not, is pulling you into that or pulling you away. So how does, just thinking critically about how information flows and opening up those conversations, I think is a good place to start.
So let's say we're happy with the deal we've negotiated, we know what the priorities are, and we're able to focus on delivering those in a way that doesn't eat too far into our home lives and our time outside of work. So far, so good. But there are still some missing ingredients. My guest, Jacqueline Taiwo, experienced private equity lawyer and the co-founder, chair and chief executive of the organisation Black Women in Asset Management, knows exactly what else is needed for people to want to stay. So the 6th thing is to feel part of a community where people can be themselves and have the conversations they need in order to succeed at different stages of their life and their career.
But I think the thing that drives me now and really helps me thrive today is community. And I think that's another thing that I had been lacking and looking for when I started my legal career here in London. And I think for certainly through Black women in asset management and what I try to impart on young people who are starting their careers is to find that community early on. Whether it's, we talk a lot about mentors and sponsors, people above you who have gone that journey, who you can go and get insight from. That is really important, but it's also important to build relationships with people who are going on the journey alongside you, people you can call on to, once again, be that sounding board, provide insight, because it really, really makes a difference in how you see yourself in your career and your ability to be resilient through some tough times and to feel like you enjoy it. Because if you don't have that community, and if you feel like you're alone or you're by yourself, it will just feel lonely and a bit, icky inside, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's certainly part of what I do now for Black women working in the investment industry, globally, really. And I think another important aspect of, feeling good about what you're doing is to give back, and to, as we say, lift as you climb. Because I think a lot of research shows that by giving and helping others, it makes you feel good about yourself. But I think in the industry where I come from, it also helps you, feel like you're improving it by helping perhaps other women, other people of color, or just young people come into this space and be a source, a resource for them. Um, I think that once again makes you feel like the work you're doing is important. It makes you feel good about the work that you're doing. So I tell for myself and I tell others, build that community, because that will really help you, I think, thrive in your career. But going back to the mission of Black women in asset management, ultimately, we want to see more Black women in senior leadership roles within the industry, particularly in the investment decision making seats. Once again, whether that's portfolio manager, fund manager, an investor. And so we do spend a lot of time thinking about, how to foster and encourage that. Um, while, we have a great numbers in our membership, that is still very tiny percentage of the industry. Like
Mhm.
I'm not naive about that. Um, but there's a lot of opportunity within there, because I've talked with so many women at different stages of their careers, at the early, mid, senior. And while everyone is different, you do, pull out certain themes that folks are facing early in their career as they grow. And you hear from the mid-level women how they got through that. And you hear from the senior level women how they got through that. And I think a lot of it, once again, is just connecting them so they can start having these conversations. And so you're not going through it alone, or you're learning from the people who have been through it. My theory of impact here is that by getting these women connected, that will keep more women in the industry and help them advance.
That sense of connection and community and meaningful conversation is critical to how people feel about their jobs and their employers, more so than ever post pandemic. People want more from work than just churning through the day's tasks and ticking the boxes on their personal objectives. They want to feel and experience a richer relationship with their work and with the people they work with, to feel recognised, trusted, valued, and rewarded. My guest, Geraldine Gallagher, CEO of the Executive Coaching Consultancy and author of a new book, Coaching Women Changing the System, Not the Person, shared this seventh piece of wisdom, which is about how to create a sense of engagement now and over the longer term. What are you hearing now from the many people that you support through coaching about how they're feeling about their work lives? What matters most to them when they think about staying in their jobs?
I think for employees, for most people, it's about engagement. You stay in a job now because you feel engaged and you feel a sense of belonging with the team. I coach mainly leaders, and I think what leaders are grappling with is they understand that this engagement is important, and an easy way to create engagement, of course, is in person. But they recognize that they want to give people the autonomy and the flexibility, because if you don't give them the flexibility, I think people will vote with their feet. So you have to give that flexibility, but at the same time, how do you create the engagement if most of the time you're on screen? And I think that's a real dilemma that, certainly in your book, that's one of the things that you talk about is how do you, in the future of work. I think coming into work will be more about creating anchor days where everybody does come in, and where you maybe concentrate on personal development, or team dynamics. You concentrate on anything which has got a team dimension to it, because what is really pointless is travelling in on the tube, coming to work, having just spent an hour and a half, and then getting on Zoom, and everybody scrabbling for the quiet rooms to get on Zoom to do calls. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense, does it? And it's really hard to change it up because that it's almost like the rhythm of work needs to change quite considerably.
Yeah, and I think to make that future scenario, which I completely agree with, work well, requires a lot more transparent conversations about the different things people work on and what is the right environment for each of those things. When do we need to be in a more face-to-face collaborative environment? And then, so therefore, you almost need to add, a different level of time management and working pattern management, definitely at the team level, and instead of just having a blanket, this is the way it's going to be, but actually much more negotiated around the team. Okay, we need to work it differently, and figure out what would work best for the team, but also kind of reflects everyone's needs and preferences as well.
I also think, Helen, I don't know how you feel about this, but I often have very, very good intentions about going in. And now I just find, because it's the about coming into the office. I mean, I'm in the office today, and the thing is, if you get thrown a curved ball first thing in the morning, because you can do things on Zoom, it's much easier to think, well, actually, I could do that from home. And so I think what's quite tricky is that it's almost like short-term requirements versus a longer term need. I know in the long term it's better for me. Even over the course of a week, I know I've had a better week when I'm in, and I've been in more often. However, things come up. For example, if you have a whole day of meetings and 2 of them are on Zoom and 2 are in person, and the in-person ones are postponed. So you think, well, why would I go in? So then you change your diary accordingly. And I think it's very difficult, because you almost need to have some kind of boundary set for you where you have to go in for some elements, because otherwise I think we all default to the easiest. And it's got to be easier to be at home. It's just got to be easier to be at home rather than traveling.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree with that kind of short-term gain versus longer-term gain. I think it's a really interesting way of framing it. And it's always more convenient not to commute anywhere, isn't
Yes,
it?
absolutely.
The eighth and final piece of advice on how to make people want to stay comes from my guest last week, Victoria Livingston, who is Chief People Officer for the EMEA region at the 5th largest advertising agency network globally, Dentsu International. Victoria leads major business transformations and knows that during times of organisational change and upheaval, which, let's face it, is pretty much all of the time these days, the most important thing to get right is to bring people with you. It's a lot harder than it sounds, as Victoria explains, but if you don't get this right, the business will suffer. For a lot of people, change is very uncomfortable, quite threatening, and not something necessarily that we've chosen for ourselves. It might feel like it's being imposed on us. So what are the I'm curious to know kind of what's hardest for you as someone leading that kind of change, and then also what helps others get on board and really embrace it positively, that I guess makes the biggest difference to the business at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that the hardest thing is trying to ensure that there's alignment on the change and the transformation. I think if I had to pinpoint where things go wrong, it's where there's too many different versions of the change going on. There's competing or conflicting priorities. I think I've also seen if there's insufficient prioritization given to the change, insufficient budget, lack of senior buy-in. And I think that is always hardest to try and ensure that if there is a change and transformation program, that it is really very, very clear and that there is all of the elements aligned to it that ensure it's being set up for success. So, the leadership team are all on board. There's clarity on the goal. There's clarity on how long it's going to take. That it fits with the realities of the strategy, the vision, the culture, the products, the services, and the reality of the external environment, whether that be economic, political, or competitive, and that change program is really prioritized and given the just focus, attention, resources and support that's necessary, and that the change management element isn't under resourced or under budgeted or ignored. For any transformation program to work effectively, it genuinely needs a people and culture element to it. I've yet to see one work of a significant size when that element isn't catered for. And I think the change element of it that's within that people and culture strand is so critical in helping people to understand the change, helping them to understand the why, being able to connect themselves with that vision and that purpose, and ensuring that the culture is shifting with it. I think that a culture evolves with a transformation, and you can end up with a tweaked way of working, a tweaked culture, a tweaked value proposition for employees. Without it, it's just moving chairs around almost, and without really resolving or moving to a different direction. Any strategy or transformation change has to bring people with it, and people need to be engaged or on board, or otherwise they will fight against the transformation. And any end state, any future strategy or purpose or vision will require a shift in mindset and behaviors and how people will work with each other, and how they will feel and how they will behave and act in that future state. And it is absolutely fundamental to actually achieving any future strategy or transformation that a company is clear on how it will shift people in their organization, and how they will work, and that culture, that value proposition. So I think those are some of my critical success factors whenever I'm working with transformation programs.
So there you have it, 8 immensely valuable pieces of advice from experts in their fields on how to make employees want to stay and do their best work. I hope you found these conversations helpful as you think about your own career or the team or organisation that you're leading. Let me know which piece of advice resonates most for you. I'm very grateful to all my guests in this series for sharing their wisdom and their own career stories with me. Series 4 will be back in the first quarter of next year with a new lineup of brilliant guests. In the meantime, enjoy the run up to the festive season, the time out with friends and family, hopefully over Christmas and New Year, and also perhaps a little bit of time to yourself to reflect on how this year has been for you and what your hopes are for next year. If there's something we might collaborate on or some networking we can do together, please do get in touch and let me know. See you on the other side.